Well, what do you think, Debbie? Get it started? Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. And I want to welcome you to our May 21st and final session with our mathematics at the higher grades activities and the work that we've done this year as part of the MOEC consortia. I do want to say to you, welcome to my home. This is my home office in California, and I'm only keeping my door open for another second because I want to show you something that the group on Tuesday did not get to see, but I'll get out of the way here. But on the floor there, you can see our golden retriever. That's Fibonacci is her name. And I just wanted you to see that we had a golden retriever named after a famous mathematician. And I thought those of you on this call from high schools would certainly appreciate the idea that a golden retriever and the golden ratio, okay, if I have to explain that, then obviously you don't see that inside story. But I thought that was pretty cool that we were allowed to name our golden retriever Fibonacci. But with that, I'm going to close my door and hit her in the nose a little bit there, but she'll be fine. So, I want to tell you, this has really been an interesting time. Has it not been the most unusual time you've ever experienced? As we have ended this fourth quarter of the 2019-2020 school year in really unprecedented. I've never seen anything like this. And I was even thinking today that sort of the good news is we will get through this. There will come a day when perhaps our regular classrooms as we understood it will come back, perhaps always changed, but they will come back. But this certainly has been completely unexpected. And one of the things that I'm very aware of, and it's why I have this picture in the bottom right-hand corner of this opening slide as I meet with you all again and have this chance to experience this with you. Tuesday, we had a really good time, I think, in terms of understanding some basic elements of things we need to do right now in order to move forward. But I was really aware of the fact that it was so unusual for how we as teachers had to adjust to our teaching. And that I wrote this article in mid-April now, but it still applies today, titled Good Enough for Now. It was a blog that I actually wrote for Solution Tree. And the reason I wrote it is because I was getting a lot of emails from teachers, just like all of us, teachers and administrators, about how hard we were working, how inadequate we felt, how vulnerable we felt because we were going into homes or seeing homes through the work we were doing in e-learning, where we realized that a lot of our students have a very difficult situation for learning at home, and that can get really difficult. So with all of that in mind, I think this is, and then this group too, especially, we're part of the high school rituals that come with the fourth quarter in the spring season just were abandoned in so many ways that we normally understood them. And so I just think we've gone through a lot. And I want to just say that my point in the Good Enough for Now article was that we need to give compassion to our students and what they went through, and compassion to ourselves, self-compassion. But I want to be clear what compassion is as we think about the work we're about to be doing. Compassion runs through a lens of empathy. Empathy is when you are aware that others are suffering. So we're aware of the suffering of our students. But compassion is when you act to relieve that suffering. So you're not just aware of it, but you want to relieve it. And yet you can't relieve all of that suffering, whatever that suffering looks like. So that's where for today, we have to say, well, we did the best we could today, and we'll just try to make tomorrow better. And the purpose of this final webinar with you, even though I would like it if we could be together, but this virtual webinar, the real purpose is to take a look at how, what the for now part is, like how are we going to get better for the summer and the fall and the things that we want to look to there. So just keep that in mind as we go through it. Just a couple of days ago, even in your state, in the state of Nebraska, your governor was recognized in a national policy and research article with a policy that's very similar to what I can tell you is going on in about 34 other states, which is that we've got decisions to make about what happens this summer with our sports activities and other kinds of programs that are happening. What's going to happen in the fall? Are we really going to open with e-learning? Are we going to open with regular learning? If we open with typical classrooms as we understood them, what will that mean in terms of access to students and CDC guidelines, et cetera? And that message almost changes daily. So amid all of that, the question is, what do we need to do to be prepared for whatever is going to happen next fall? And that's a big part of what I want to address today. In this webinar, we're going to spend most of our time looking at this very first outcome. We're going to take a look at the fourth quarter not yet standards that have not been learned yet, and what are we doing with that information for next year, and what's the best we know about how that should look. Then we're going to spend a little bit of time summarizing the 2019-2020 feedback report that you gave us on the work that we did together this year. Then I'm going to take us into and tell you a little bit about what my team observed when we were able to come on site to many of your schools and what happened then. And at the very end, we're going to spend about 15 minutes taking a really critical self-evaluation survey that's really required in order for us to answer the funders of this project. Remember, this has been part of a project within the consortia, but the funding of that project requires we have certain grant accountability requirements. And so we meet those requirements through this end of year self-evaluation tool that you'll complete. It's going to be online. It's pretty smooth. I think it'll go pretty easy, as you'll see when we get there. All of the folks we had online on Tuesday in the workshop were pretty much able to get it completed, which was great to get that data. We'll be adding your data to it, and I'll explain more about it when we get there. So here's something that's really just interesting to me, interesting. But about a year ago, I sat down with my team, of which Sarah Schulz, one of the leaders on my team, and obviously has worked with you for the last 2 years. But last January, actually, so a little over a year ago, I sat down with the team and I said, look, we need to write these unit planning guides, because what we're finding in a lot of the schools we go in and work with is that we start working with them just like we did with your consortia around building common assessments. But what we found out was there wasn't even an agreement on what the common standards were that were supposed to be taught in every unit. The unit plans were sort of vague. It depended on the school districts we're in across the country, so I'm not talking about your district per se, the districts that have been part of this, but this has been a general national problem that we've observed. And so I was like, we need to write some unit planning books about how a professional learning community would actually do correct unit planning. Little did I know that at the time that we conceived the idea, designed the program, and then wrote the books, and we're still writing them, we're finishing them up. This picture that you see on the screen is the grades 3-5 book. And we did them by grade levels, pre-K 2, 3-5, middle school, and high school, because obviously the needs are a little bit different, as you know, for a second grade unit plan versus a high school unit plan. But the reality is that the key elements are still the same. And so we created a process in which you can revise math units and plans for each as you go through your school seasons, right? But the reality is, it's really urgent for 2020, 2021. Because in general, most school seasons, you have a pretty good feeling, okay, these are the standards that were learned. These are the standards that were not learned yet. These were the standards kids had access to. I know maybe there are a few in the fourth quarter they didn't get access to. But the reality is, because of the nature and the wide variance of e-learning going on in this fourth quarter, and even our ability to monitor student performance in that e-learning, it's even more urgent than this time that we know, okay, what happened in 8th grade for all our incoming freshmen in terms of the mathematics that they do or don't know because of the fourth quarter, because of the pandemic that we're going through. So that was funny to me, interesting that, we started out a year ago just feeling the need for this, but now we have this crisis. So I want to stop here, and I'm going to ask you to do this several times throughout this session. you're going to notice that we have an ability to use a chat box. Okay, so you can go in the chat box. This worked pretty well last week. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to type out what you currently are doing to try to capture the not yet standards in the fourth quarter of the course that's before your course, right? Because since this is high school, or what happened in 8th grade for the freshmen coming in. And I know a lot of schools have already thought about this. You're working on it. Others of you are kind of trying to figure it out. One thing is when you start putting your comments in, not just now, but anytime I ask you to, could you please make sure you just put your school name, you know, or abbreviated name or whatever, because we might not know that you're from Westside, or we might not know exactly, you know, what school district you're in, so, or school. And somebody might see this because we're going to be recording it and go, oh, I'd like to talk to that school because they threw that idea out during this webinar. All right, so I see some of you are already starting to comment, but if you would do that. So what's your current plan? Like, could you type that out just briefly to teach the standards that are not yet being learned in the fourth quarter? So when you think about how you're going to start next year, and I'm assuming you're somehow finding out what wasn't taught, what's your current plan for how you're going to teach the standards? And, you know, if you can give it to us in, like, I don't know, 2 sentences, that would be great. So I'm going to get quiet for a minute and give you a chance just to type in your answers. If you go to the chat box, we should all be able to see what you're writing, which would be great. All right, go ahead. And thanks for doing this. These are great. Okay, thanks everyone. I know that 2 minutes goes pretty fast when we're doing this way, but if you've got something, keep adding in, because don't forget we're recording this record, and so we are able to give you a summary, kind of an I'm using the royal we. I really meant to, and I meant to do this in the beginning, to thank ESU3, because Debbie Schrader and her team and Aaron and so on, they've really been doing a great job of helping us not only prepare for today, but get everything ready for today. So kudos to them, especially in helping us make this Zoom meeting happen. So if you have further thoughts, don't be afraid to throw them in there. It'll become part of our record. So I need to ask you to think about it from this point of view. Like anything in a professional learning community, it should be part of a process. And so the way our team looks at it as a professional learning community team, and I'm talking about Sarah, myself, and those of us writing our books, is that there's sort of a 4-step process you follow, and that we should follow specifically. In general, we would do this, but it's very specific to what's gone on in this very unique 2019-2020 school year. So the first step, which I noticed some of you did actually list, is to identify previous grade level or course standards not learned yet. And I really like that phrase, not learned yet, because not learned yet just means that, because the reason that's an important phrase, right, is because it doesn't say previous standards or grade level standards not taught, right? Because we may have taught them in the e-learning environment, but we don't have evidence that they actually learned them. So there's still a not learned yet standard. So there's kind of that's an important distinction to make clear. And so one is just identifying how are we going to go get those? So we'll talk about that. And then two, the second step is to decide exactly how you're going to embed those standards into this coming year. Those standards from the previous year, how will I embed them into the coming year? I want to look at that second step. Then the third step is revising our unit planning calendars and making sure those specific calendars for every unit in geometry or algebra 2 or pre-calculus or algebra 1 get revised and slightly tweaked because of what you're going to have to do in this unusual time that we're in. And then number 4, and by the way, that revision also means things you're just not going to teach. You're going to have to take some stuff out. And I'm assuming this is going to be done with a task force this summer. You probably can't get your whole math department together, but you could get a task force of representatives together to spend a little bit of time kind of digging through these things and getting them done. And then determining how whether or not the way you're going to teach the standards needs to be a tier 1 or a tier 2 intervention. So we're going to look at that 4-step process, and I'll take you through it one at a time and give you a chance to talk about it a little bit online in the chat box. So the first thing here is, as I mentioned, is to identify previous grade level standards not learned yet. And I would encourage you to use something like this kind of 2-column tool product that you see here on the screen. And by the way, you have the PDF, you'll have access to the PDF. So, and this tool itself is a Word document that I've created. And at the end of the session, I'm going to give you that link as well. So you'll be able to just use that document if you want. You don't have to, but you could use some revised version of it. So here you see, okay, what are the essential standards that are learned? I'd actually like the year before me to actually tell me what they think are the essential standards learned. It really could be helpful to you in the following year. So especially like coming from 8th grade to 9th grade, those 8th grade teacher or teacher team should be able to tell you, well, here are all the essential standards we were able to teach. We weren't able to get to this stuff on linear, so that would go over in the right-hand column. We didn't get to linear functions. We weren't able to do much with slope. We weren't, whatever are those standards. And notice there's a difference. This is really important. I've said it once already, but I'm talking a lot here, so it's hard to catch it all. But there's a difference between essential standards not learned, in other words, you did teach it, versus you didn't even get time to address it. So the geometry teachers are going to be telling the Algebra 2 team, guess what, guys? We didn't get to anything on surface area and volume. That went right out the window. We never even got to it. That 4th quarter e-learning kind of got messed up, and some of us were able to get to it, others of us weren't able to, or we got to it, but we don't. Right. So anyway, you identify those things. Here's my question that I want to ask you very specifically, and what's really weird about it is I want you to give me a date, okay? So when you type in, all you got to do is type in a date. And I want a commitment. All right, so here's the date. How will the essential standards not learned yet be collected and shared with the next grade level or course? By what date do you expect to have that done for each course in your high school math department? Right? Whether it's honors, whether it's regular, obviously you're going to have to go back and talk to somebody from the 8th grade or the 8th grade team. So by what date would you hope to have this done? June 15th, June 30th, May 21st? You've already done it? All right, so go ahead. Just type in your date, let people know. Here's what we're thinking right now. We'd like to at least have this first step done by. All right, go. And I see a lot of you are already starting to answer. Thank you. Okay, these are great answers. Again, if you have anything else you want to add, please don't hesitate to do that. So here's what's interesting about this too, right, is that for the administrators on our webinar today, obviously you need to do this in multiple subject areas, but in math, as you know, and I hate to say this, but one of my favorite sayings with Rick DeFore, my boss, was, well, Rick, math is a little different than every other subject area. And he kind of look at me like, yeah, all right. But it is different, right? And math and world languages, foreign language, are vertically connected curriculums. You really do need last week, last year, last month to do this week, this year, this month. So I think it's a little, the story arcs are a little more exacerbated by things that haven't been taught. And so that's why it's an important question, getting a firm deadline on when this will be done. And I see a lot of you are working on it right now, which is great. Well, this takes us to another question about this, though, when you do it, because a lot of you said this is this, this, this. And I know by the word this, you mean, I think you meant, you know, the standards that haven't been taught yet have been identified. But I wonder if you've gone deeper into what this is. This is all about academic rigor. You see, with math, when we talk about a standard, take any standard, for example, the standard on the slope of a line, a typical thing we study in linear in Algebra 1. You know, that mathematical rigor has three legs of the stool. One leg is a conceptual understanding. What does slope actually mean? Another leg is procedural fluency. Can I do problems where I actually write the equation of a line using slope, or where I actually determine or find slope? And another leg is where I do an application, where perhaps I have some type of application where I'm actually determining the length of something, or the distance of something, or the whether or not two things are parallel, or I'm doing some type of application about data that is in a linear pattern and has a constant rate of change, and that data and that constant rate of change represents something that's linear. And by finding that constant rate of change, I can understand the slope. So there's three legs of a stool around one standard. And the question is that academic rigor going to be consistent? Or is it in terms of for our whole team? And do we say, well, for next year, we're going to have to mostly focus on this leg of the stool or that leg of the stool? And I just want to say to everyone on this call, the danger is, and the high school math teachers know this, the danger is, because of this additional content that you're going to have to spend some time on, is that you're going to dumb it down to only the procedural fluency leg. You will abandon the conceptual understanding leg. Well, let's just get the formula out there and get going because we don't have time. And that would be a big mistake. So keep that in mind. You know, you really want to make sure, okay, as we think about this, should we just let a different standard go altogether so we can do a better job of teaching all three legs of the stool of this standard? Or maybe I'm going to teach that standard without technology, or maybe I'm going to teach it only with technology, and so on. So just keep in mind, you're going to have some discussions about the rigor. One thing Sarah Schull and I have talked about, and I think this is something we'd actually like to work with you on next year. This has nothing to do with like the urgency of now, but rather maybe down the road. So we're in 2020, so maybe by 2023, 2024, I think down the road it would be great if, and maybe if and because of e-learning, if your high school teams could start keeping track of essential standards learned and not learned every year. So what would pass forward with a student would be, well, in Algebra 1, I learned these 9 standards, but not these 5, bigger essential standards. And in geometry, I learned these 8 standards, but I'm still a not yet kid in these 3. And that passes on with the child. So it's not just about giving grades, which are important to do, but we also sort of pass on our current teacher knowledge about student progression on standards. This is already something that's done in K-5, but it's not something that's typically done as much in high schools. So it's something to talk about for the future, and how can your student management system actually help you with this? The second step then, so many of you have said, hey, we're working on it. It's already been done. We're in the hopper with it. We did it this morning. But now the second step is to decide the appropriate mathematics units to embed the standards from the previous year. And I wish in this slide that you're seeing, I would have highlighted in red the word embed. So we have quite a bit of research evidence that the number one thing you should not do, like the worst thing you could do, would be to start the year with the standards that were not learned yet. So here's the stuff the kids didn't learn in 8th grade. I'm going to start my Algebra 1 class with 2 units on that, and then I'll start Algebra 1. That would be really, really bad. All right, so don't do that. I know you're not doing it because you guys are smart. You've been part of our consortia. Of course you wouldn't be doing that. But what we should do is figure out our units and embed them. Now, this particular example that you see here on the screen, you're probably looking at it going, what? Well, this is actually from our unit planning book, but the only one that's out so far is grades 3-5. High school book won't be out till the fall. And so this is actually a grade 4 sample of the whole year. You see, in elementary school, and if you have your own children in elementary school, you know this, there's only really about 7 units, major units of study that go on for the whole year in like 4th grade. These, actually, you see the 7 units right here. And you kind of even see these sort of end dates that are listed, depending, and this all depends on the school district and when they start, when they end, et cetera. But so in these 7 units, you'll notice a couple of things. First of all, the up in blue at the top where that first yellow arrow is question mark, and I'm laughing because I'm pointing to my screen and I know you can't see me do what I'm pointing at. But that unit 1, for example, says it'll last 20 days. Well, probably not for next year. For next year, it's probably going to have to last 22 days because there will be some things from the prior year that they're going to need to embed in. It might take a couple of days. Or if we look at unit 5 and see the yellow arrow that's down below on unit 5. Well, what's interesting about that is that there's 2 standards that are in dark, that are bold, and 1 that's not, because traditionally the 2 in bold are what are called essential standards. We will fail as 4th grade teachers if we don't teach those 2 essential standards. The 1 that's not in bold, add decimal fractions, is considered a nice to know standard. You don't have to get to it. If you don't get to it, the kids won't, fall off the cliff in 5th grade. So one of the things to think about is what's our have to know standards versus our nice to know standards, and being really clear about that in your revised units for next year. Now, typically in a high school Algebra 1 or geometry course, you're going to see 9 or 10 units probably, and spaced out, and you're going to have to kind of revise and think about the number of days that you want. Like this team seems to think 20 days works for every unit. I don't think it works like that. Some might be 32, some might be 23 or whatever. But the important thing to notice too is they always have an end date, which is kind of like, okay, by this date though, we will be here, we'll get here. So anyway, you're gonna have to revise those general unit plans about which standards are we actually covering, and identify that based on where are we going to place the new standards, not the new standards, the standards from the prior year. Where are we going to place them in, and how does that affect the number of days needed? All right. So this is getting at making sure we have appropriately placed those standards that have not been learned yet into the units for next year at point of use. And I saw some of you say that you were going to do something like that. So now I'd like to stop after this one and ask you to use the chat again to type in the method you're using to get this done. So are you bringing together a small group of teachers from your team, from your department this summer to work on it? Are you doing it as a whole district? And then it'll go out to all the high schools in your district. We have different kinds of schools and districts in this consortia. So could you kind of just let us know a little bit about how you're getting the plan done? Like what mechanism are you using? What structure to get the decisions made? So this isn't left up to an individual teacher, but it's done more as a learning community decision. All right, and I see a lot of you are starting to type in already. Thank you. So go ahead and give us some hints, and don't forget to tell us your school or district that you're typing in for or from. I'll get quiet for a minute. I see some of you are saying we're going to do it, but who is we? I'm kind of curious to that. Are you talking about one teacher making the decision for the entire department? Are you talking about the department chair doing all this? Is the the entire team's coming together this summer to decide it? I saw someone said, well, I just did it online while you're talking, Tim. But I'm like, okay, but what does that mean? Who's looking at that data? Who's going to decide and make the final decisions so that it's equitable for all children that take that algebra course or that geometry course next year? Okay, got it. Thank you. This is yeah, appreciate it. Remember, this is going to be a written record everybody gets access to, so you're really helping us out by letting us know the group of people making the decision. Awesome. Again, too, and I appreciate this, you guys doing this. I'm gonna, if you have something else you want to add, please do, but I'm gonna keep pushing us on. But if you're going to do this, I do want to suggest that you get this done this summer. Somehow, whether you got to go to somebody's house and get the group of teachers together, you know, at Stevenson, we're doing all of this like you are right now, but also getting the whole process done so that all of this will be finished probably by July, I'd say 15th or so, so that the teachers know what to expect across the board for every school in the district. All right, let's take another look. So, you know, when you go to do this, this is one way to do it. I saw Debbie Schrader mention that I'm going to give you the link to our tool that we're using. And the one subtle part about it is the third column of the chart you see here on the screen. The ideas for standards to drop or de-emphasize. I think one of the things you need to be realistic is as you embed the not yet standards, you've got to ask yourself, okay, but then what are some of just the nice to know standards that were normally in our course of geometry or algebra 2 or whatever that I don't really need to worry about as much? You know, so for example, algebra 2 probably didn't get to much of the probability and statistics for this year. Well, that's fine because pre-calc or what discrete math or whatever course they're going on to for a fourth year course can handle it there. It's very possible that you're going to have to think about, all right, well, what's our whole trig story? Because that just went out the window. You know, we didn't get a chance to really get to. So no matter what the topics are, because it's specific to your math curriculum arcs, I just would encourage you to think about, all right, but then what has to be, what's just a nice to know? I have these 10 really important things, Tim, that I want to teach first semester in my course every year. Well, guess what? You're not going to get to all 10. You're going to get to 8 because you have to also embed some of these other things. So you just have to make some decisions about how you'll adjust things. And as you do adjust them, that's going to affect part 3 here, your calendars. Because the third part then is to go in and dig into your unit planning calendars. And I know you have these because without getting aware, at one of the schools I was at during my site visits on March 4th and 5th, I saw your unit planning calendars. And so the unit planning calendar, you know what that is. That's the calendar that spells out the 23 days of how we're going to cover this unit and the different standards we're going to cover in each day. When will the unit start? When will it end? And then how do we kind of all get there, even if it's not always exactly on the same days? One of the things, though, that you will need to think about is how do we tweak or revise our assessments a little bit because we have to accommodate 2019, 2020, right? And that's why in this particular sample calendar, and again, this is a 4th grade calendar, right? But notice highlighted in yellow are the assessment moments, so that the teachers know, okay, on the 5th day we have that assessment, on the 8th day we have that one. Here's what we're going to have, the end of unit assessment that comes up. So getting that calendar tweaked, somebody's got to do that. You know, I'm assuming you all have these. If you don't have them, you need to create them and think about it. In a typical Algebra 1 course, you're going to probably have about 9 of these unit calendars, right? So, and the reason the unit calendar is also helpful is you can see it. I'm not a big fan, just so I can tell you this, of this particular calendar you're seeing. I love the calendar, but the fact that there are dates on there, like January 6th, January 7th, January 8th, January 9th, I would not put dates on there. I would just put day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, all the way to day 26. You know, so that because you may need some flexibility, and you don't know for sure that you can really start that unit on that day, right? So with that in mind, let me ask you to get into the chat one more time on this one, and just again indicate to us this. Are you, and all you got to do is say yes or no. So it's really easy in the chat. It's yes or no. Are you planning on revising your mid-unit assessments and your end-of-unit assessments for each unit of study in the next courses? Is that currently part of your plan, yes or no? And if you say no, that's okay. Just think about, okay, how are we going to address it as part of our plan? All right. So just let us know, is this currently part of your plan or not? And you guys are awesome. Yeah, and I know I'm seeing everybody saying yes, and I just want to tell you, the only good thing that might come out of this is, I would tell you this: don't revise them too much, but revise them, just tweak them enough that you're accommodating the new teaching that had to come in. But on the other hand, this may just make them stronger. You've done a lot of work on your assessments. Thank goodness they're in common because of your work as part of MOEC, so this should really help you. Yeah, gotcha. All right, thanks everybody. You're awesome, as I said already. Well, here we go. So this is probably the toughest part. And this is a little more subtle, I think, in terms of its impact, but I think it's going to help you actually not be quite so panicked for next year, for 2020, 2021. In this 4th step of the process of taking on what wasn't learned last year, I think it's really important that you determine, of the stuff that wasn't learned yet, what is tier 1 versus what is tier 2. Now, I was on a webinar yesterday where some folks asked me, had nothing to do with MOEC, what do you mean tier 1, tier 2? So I know you all know this because you've been with us, but just as a reminder, tier 1 is an intervention, meaning I'm going to actually teach in-class instruction around this standard. In other words, I'm not confident at all about any understanding they have of the concept of slope. So we're going to do an entire lesson on that concept. I'm not going to leave that up to a tier 2 intervention. So I'm going to make that part of in-class. Tier 2 intervention would be supplemental intervention, as you see in green there. Tier 2 intervention is where I'm like, okay, I'm pretty sure, you know, that they've had so many times where they understood about slope, they don't really need me to reteach the whole thing. I'll just have that done in intervention time outside of my class. So it'll get done during some type of after-school program or tutoring session or some type of stations activity. Maybe on Fridays I'll have half my class period be an intervention time, and I'll have stations around certain topics, and I'll just let them re-engage with it there. right? So it's a standard that needs additional time and support, but I don't need to actually make it part of a whole additional lesson, right? That's the difference between Tier 1 and Tier 2, as you know, because we've talked a lot this past year about Tier 2 intervention. And by the way, as you're going to see in a little while, part of the feedback I received from you is that you'd really like to dig deeper into your Tier 2 interventions for next year. And kind of and find out more about what other schools are doing and so on, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But for now, what I want you to look at here is this. I really like this slide a lot, and I want to have you think about it for a second. Feel free to like snapshot it right now, you know, screenshot it if you want. Obviously, it's also going to in your handout. But I think as you go to look at these standards, you want to ask yourself, okay, as I just said, is this a Tier 1 standard? In other words, it's so essential as a not yet taught standard, we're going to have to teach it. We need to spend a day on it, a lesson on it. Is this a prior knowledge standard for an essential standard in our greater course? In other words, it's so important, I can't get through what I need to teach on quadratics in Algebra 2 if I don't first have some lessons on the quadratics I know they did not get in Algebra 1, right? Tier 2 standards would be things that are being passed on to you from the previous grade, but you're like going, you know what, that could probably be done pretty quickly in review. I think I could get, you know, that, I know what they did with right triangles in geometry. I think I could go through that pretty quickly in review in order to get them ready to do the periodic stuff with trig functions I want to do. You know, right? Or I know that it's an essential standard that can be taught before its unit in a shorter amount of time. In other words, I don't need to spend a day on it in class, but in our tutoring sessions or our outside of class intervention, we're going to make sure the kids get some teaching on this like a week before or a few days before they're actually going to learn it in my class itself, right? So that's the difference. Standards that you feel could probably be done without necessarily all the expertise of a full Tier 1 lesson with all kinds of teacher feedback intervention. All right, it's going on in class. So here's my question for you to think about. To think about and answer in the chat box. Would you indicate, based on whatever your knowledge is as of this current moment, and I get it, for some of you this might be hard to answer, so for the people that are able to answer, what % of the not yet learned standards do you think need to be Tier 1 for next year, for your department in general, for the courses that are moving forward, because it's every course is suffering from the previous year's course lack of ability to get through everything. What % is going to be Tier 1, what % is Tier 2? So that's all you got to do. Tier 1, 55, Tier 2, 45, Tier 1, 80, Tier 2, 20, Tier 1, 30, Tier 2, 70, whatever. What do you think it is? And that might be helpful for all of us to see kind of across the board from school to school or district to district, okay? All right, I'll shut up, give you a chance to fill that in. Remember, it's just a guess. It's an estimated guess based on your knowledge so far of what's going on in your school. Nice. Yeah, so I see, Fran, you said it depends on which course. Could you still give us a guess? Could you give us a numerical guess? Because it's really helpful to see about what you think, you know, or choose one course and tell us what you think your guess is. Yeah. Thanks. Okay. Wow. All right. Thanks, everybody. That's really helpful. And again, if you have something you want to add to it, please do, because it'll be part of the record. That's really, if you're right, that's really good news, because the more you can put into tier 2, the less your adjustments you have to make in your current unit plans. The only key will be, are you confident it can get done in year 2 and at point of use just in time? And that'll be something that will require a lot of planning and support from the administration as well. I did get a question yesterday or Tuesday about, Tim, what happens if, I got this afterwards, somebody emailed me. And the question was, what happens if some of our tier 2 stuff's taken away because we're losing funding for educational programs? That is a fear. I kind of get it, but it's not a known fear yet. I mean, we don't know for sure what that means. But my response to will be, no matter what, if at all possible in math, don't abandon your interventions, because probably math and language arts would be the two that I say definitely without those supports, students will really struggle, and they won't be very confident in the beginning because of stuff they feel like they don't know already anyway. All right. So thanks, you guys. This has been good so far. If you're hanging with me. One thing we've been addressing is, so what happens if you come back to school and you're not starting with students? You're starting virtually again. I felt like one of the advantages you had with the fourth quarter loss of student contact was you at least knew all the kids. You had contact with them. So there was this kind of, what would you call it, kind of connection with them that helped you probably virtually. Now the school year could start and you've got to start with them virtually. They don't really know you. You don't know all of them. It's a little bit tougher. But the one thing I would tell you, again, for today's topic, which is about unit planning, is that I would seriously consider, looking at the form that you see here in front of you, that you just say, okay, we're going to start virtually. Now there are ways to start virtually successfully, which I'm not going to get into in great detail here just because of time, but most of you probably have learned over the past 12 weeks. But there's the need to know standards versus important to know standards and nice to know, as I mentioned. I think if you end up going virtually, you have to focus just on the need to know. So rather than thinking about a standard or a lesson a day and how am I doing every day, you have to think about what's the essential standard for this week. One idea. That's it. Maybe there are some underlying standards too under that other standards column, but what's the one essential, and then what are the tasks or activities I'm going to have the kids do for that one standard idea for the week? Especially if I'm doing things that are asynchronous, where I'm giving them video or whatever, but I'm not there when they're actually learning it. So I think that's going to be a really, really important element to the work, and I would just encourage you to think about changing the grain size of the standard from a day to a week if you do have to go virtual again. All right, so what I'm going to talk about now for all of you that are on is very specific to our work this year. If you weren't part of our work this year and you don't feel like you want to stay on, that's fine. You're certainly welcome to, though, as we go through the next few pieces. This first thing that I want to look at is the survey we gave to you. We, meaning ESU3, conducted the survey to get feedback on how we did on our messages and so on to you. The first one was just what's the purpose of the program? Why are we part of this consortia? And one of the responses we got was, well, it's to improve, or as a general theme, was to improve our total math department to work as teachers to implement common assessments and assignments. And that certainly was true. And that the ultimate goal was to create processes that allow us to find evidence of student learning while we stretch and grow and improve. And I was really glad to see that, because that is the PLC life. The PLC life is a life of us becoming more transparent with one another to stretch and learn and grow together. Second thing that a lot of people said was kind of this collection of like-minded school districts that are working to achieve greater success for our math students. It gave us a chance to see other school districts that are like ours. And in high school math departments very specifically, how could help with that. The survey also asked, was the work we did over the past 2 years valuable? And 97% of you said yes, it was, or to some degree of valuable or super valuable or whatever. And a lot of you indicated that, however, it depended on the cohort year. That some of you said if you were in year 1 and part of it this year, it kind of felt like you were constantly catching up. And if you were in year 2, it kind of felt like, well, why are we repeating some things? So that's something we have to consider in a year 3 is that issue. Another thing was PLC time. A lot of you come from schools districts that have just really great high quality PLC time, and so you were able to take what we were doing and go back into your school and work with it. But others of you said, no, Tim, we don't have any time to do any of this, and it's pretty frustrating. So we're getting these ideas. We know we're supposed to go back, but we don't even have time to work with our other math teachers on these learning community things because we don't have PLC team time. We did get quite a bit of questions or comments about really valuable was tier 2 time and wanting to go really deeper on that issue, and as well as issues of instruction. So that was good feedback, and we're going to take a look at that as well. Should we continue? Should there be a 3rd year or not? What do you think? Well, 64% said yes, you really would like to see a 3rd year. But if we did, one thing you'd like is have more sharing. And by that, I think what you really meant was more sharing among each other. We had a couple of activities this year where you got to kind of gallery walk and see what each other was doing. And there was definitely a call for more of that. And Sarah and I are going to work on that. More of Sarah, which is good. She's awesome, and she and I make a really good complementary team. So I'm really glad. I was very glad to see the enthusiasm for Sarah's work. A lot of you asked about, can we bring new members? Can people who still weren't able to participate, can they come in? And we hear that. And again, even in this question, this idea of going deeper, we're ready to go deeper. We get it. We've got some of these tools down now. Can we go deeper? And then, did we meet your expectations? Well, 96% said yes, which we were really glad to see. Notice here, one of the comments we got, which really was great for, obviously, I do a lot of this, but you'd be surprised how nice it is to kind of see that our work was validating beliefs, but at the same time challenging you to grow inside those beliefs. So we had a lot of comments like that, and I just want to say thank you for that. That was part of our purpose of doing this program. Martha Bruckner, who's awesome and kind of our leader of this whole thing, and all of us should be giving Dr. Bruckner a huge thanks for setting this up and making it happen. She asked if I would tell you a little bit about what we observed on March 4th and 5th. When we came out to your schools. The first thing I want to tell you is all of my team, we were so impressed with how professional you are. This is a really important thing to say to you because, what do I mean by that? Professionals, the very definition of a professional is that you live by and work by standards. You have a standard. Like, you don't say, hey, just anything goes. I'll do whatever, as my colleague Rick DeFore would say, I'll do whatever I damn well please. Professionals say, no, we're going to do the best of what we know at this moment, and we're going to come together to figure that out. That's why we're not amateurs teachers, we're professional teachers. And so we really saw a level of professionalism that was quite stunning, and we appreciated that in all of you. There was incredible amount of preparation goes into something like lesson study, and the preparedness. I know some of you might have felt like, oh, we could have been better, but I want to tell you, we felt you were really well prepared, and both in terms of logistics and the lessons themselves. Third thing that was really nice to see was a certain amount of participating that was vulnerable and safe. In other words, during the debriefings, people were willing to speak up in a way that didn't threaten other people or shame other people, but actually just were trying to discuss good ideas of moving forward and getting better. The level of participation among administrators and teachers was really good. And so I think that shows your commitment to the PLC process. Revealing. What do I mean by that? I think there is something about going into each other's classrooms that sort of peels back layers of whatever we might think. It lets us see, and it reveals, oh, we all suffer from some of these same issues and ideas and problems. So when you have a critical question you're trying to ask, it's not about the person, it's about, well, how are we better engaging students in the learning, right? Because student engagement was actually one of your primary essential questions when in the lesson development design. I can tell you that that would be our one recommendation. The level of student engagement is still an issue and is going to need to be addressed by most of you, and I know you are willing to and wanting to. I think it's going to be hard because with the CDC guidelines and other things about kids being 6 feet apart, how are we really going to get them into meaningful conversations? What if they're wearing masks? What if I'm wearing a mask? You know, all those things. And the only thing I can say about that is, well, the fall of 2020 may not be normal, but hopefully there will come a time in your professional career where, you know, we'll be back to a time where getting high levels of student engagement is easily done. One thing I want to let you know about student engagement as it applies to video or e-learning scenarios. There was a great article in the Cult of Pedagogy. I don't know if you follow this online, but I would really recommend it. You can see up at the top of my screen, this screenshot actually has their web address. The Cult of Pedagogy is a good place to go when you want to get some advice on pedagogical issues in the classroom. This particular one by Karim Farah was regarding videos that you and I provide for our students if it's an e-learning situation. And here you can see in the diagram that really student attention and focus starts to fade after about 6 to 9 minutes. Remember how we talked about during direct instruction, focus starts to fade after about 8 minutes? And I'm laughing because I've gone way past 8 minutes here without asking you to type something in the chat. But notice we're at what is it, 9 to 12. At 9 to 12, about 50% of the students will stop watching when I give you an asynchronous video. And once I get past 12 minutes, it's even worse. And so what I think this really indicates is this idea of real small step instruction. As we do videos on a task or an activity with our students, that we give it in really small chunks, you know, probably 3 to 5 minute chunks. Have them work on it, and then we'll watch the next video. You know, so keeping our videos down to, I know when I do Twitter videos, I do them under 2 minutes. I try to keep them at 1:30, which is almost impossible, at least for me. But for you guys, many of you are very good at this, but you may have to have some departmental discussions about how to create really good screencasts. And just so you know, he gives a lot of other advice on this as well. So I hope that helps. Okay. So now we're going to take the time we have. I'm going to wrap us up with something at the end, but I'm going to take the next 12 minutes to invite you to actually fill out our survey for year 3 and for our grant purposes, our mathematics online self-evaluation survey. Now, before I have you fill out the survey, I want to explain both why this is so important to do, and I want to kind of indicate to you what it's going to ask you to do in a really simple form. This probably doesn't look too familiar to you unless one of our team members, when we came out on March 4th and 5th, actually shared it with you because it was in our packet. But if you look at this form, this work rating reflection framework, this is the framework we've been working on teaching you over the past 2 years. Notice there's team meetings with documents. The very first bullet just says, develop common balanced assessments aligned to and organized by the essential standards for the unit. So you're going to just indicate whether you have that or not. You'll see you're going to just fill out boxes. It's a pretty quick online survey. And you're going to answer it for each of these boxes you see up here on the screen. Notice you're also going to be asked to do a self-rating. Notice on our self-ratings, a 1 means, well, Tim, we're beginning it, but we're not we just started. A 2 means we're practicing it. We're actually, doing this. 3 means we're fully implementing it. We're like awesome at that particular activity or action. And 4 means we've embraced it. Like, we love this so much, we've, whatever. So you'll have to decide the difference between a 3 and a 4. So you're going to be doing these ratings, and when you go to do it, as you're going to see, it's going to look like this. And you're just going to choose your school district, your school, your team role, and then you're going to just start answering the questions. And it'll go pretty quickly because there's no type in. You just click on buttons and keep moving along. So if you can do 2 things. One, we have sent you, ESU3 has sent you an email prompt that will prompt you to fill out the survey, or you can go to the link. We've got a live link that's down here at the bottom of my screen. Also, we're typing in the link in the chat, so you have it in the chat box too. And you can do either one and go ahead and start taking the survey. So it's going to get kind of quiet while we take the survey. I'll kind of give you some prompts along the way. And this is really important to do. We had 116 people fill it out Tuesday. I need everyone here to fill it out as best you can. If people that participated were not here, they have until Friday. They've been sent a note. They'll have till Friday to fill it out, because this helps us report to the people who are giving us the grant money. And we need to show them progress or not that we've made on these issues that we've taught in our curriculum. It will also help us focus our efforts for you for next fall. So I'll come back in about 12 minutes, wrap us up, and then we'll be done for the session. All right, so good luck, have fun, go get them. So about 6 minutes to go or so, 5 or 6 minutes. So just take a look at how you're progressing. See if you're around Team Action 5 or so by now. Okay, so a couple minutes to go. And would you do us a favor, as you get close to the end, or as you get to the end, would you just go in the chat box and just tell us you're done? Just say done or whatever uh, to indicate to us that you're there. There's no rush, but just let us know. That way we know kind of where we're at. You still got a couple of minutes, so. Okay, you guys are doing great. Don't forget to let us know as you finish. Yeah, that's really helpful. We appreciate you doing this. It's really going to help us with our report to the folks that Dr. Breckner needs to report to. One thing I will say as if you wrap up and before I get to my closing comments is I realized I didn't even have to say, hey, here's how you put something in the chat box. It's pretty remarkable how what we've gone through, that's just a natural thing to do now. Whereas, 5 months ago, I would have, if I was on a Zoom with somebody, they'd be like, so how do I type in the chat box? Where do I get that from? So things have definitely changed for us. Okay. So as you finish up, and please do, but I want to end us on time as promised. I want to just talk to you about one particular idea as you come back in the fall. And that deals with this, with what I call validation feedback. And I want to share this with you. It's just sort of a new teaching for today, for what it's worth. You've probably been able to see on my walls behind me, my study walls, the pieces of paper on the wall. It's from a new book I'm working on that'll come out next year. It's a follow-up to my book, Heart, called Soul. And it's about telling the soul story of our work life and what does it really mean, and finding the deeper meaning of our work. And there's a lot to it, but one part of it deals with this idea of validation feedback and how do we validate our students' belief in their capability of doing the mathematics we want to learn in our case. And there's a lot to validation, because validation itself, if you take a look at this definition, is highlighted right now, I think, because we're in this incredibly strange time. Validation for us as teachers, creating a validation, a culture of validation in our classrooms, is a process of recognizing, establishing, and confirming the worthiness or legitimacy of our students as math persons. Now, I want you to think about that. Confirming the worthiness as a math person. You are a math student. You are worthy as a math student in my class. And I just have this feeling that what has happened in this fourth quarter has really done damage to a student's self-efficacy, their belief in their worthiness or their capability of doing math in your class. And I think that belief has less to do about the content itself and more to do with you and I as their teacher. That we are going to have to validate whatever progress they are making and not shame them because they don't know these things. Now, the reason I bring this up is because there is a very specific type of validation feedback. And this comes from the brain research I've been studying as part of the work I'm doing in Soul. I studied a lot of the neuroscience about how do we create classroom cultures in which kids will really try hard and succeed. And one of the pieces that I learned about was this the way in which you and I provide belonging cues and validation cues to our students during a lesson, during the way even the way they come in at the start of this year. And it's all about the nature of the feedback we give them. And if you think about it, for all of you that are still on this session, if you think about it, that has been the most maddening and frustrating part of the e-learning time we've been in, is that I cannot give my kids the feedback that I want to normally give it to them. I just don't have a way to create these really great feedback loops with them. And it's really hard to do what's on the screen. But basically, the bottom line is students effort, for lack of a better way to think of it, kicks in when they receive feedback from us that says these three things. One, you are part of my class. I know something went on last year or whatever, but you are part of my class. Two, this class is special. This is not just a third-hour geometry class. This is special. My third-hour geometry class is special to me, and you're going to learn to make it special to you. We have high standards here, though. Just because of what happened last year doesn't mean we're not going to keep the bar here. But I believe in that, and they say the third part of feedback is really an important part. I believe every one of you can reach those standards. I believe you can do it, and I will help you. So basically, it looks like this. I'm giving you this comment, these feedback on this test, this quiz, this entry into my class at this moment this year, because I have very high expectations for you, for this class, and I know you can reach them with my help. And that constant sort of feedback that signals that to kids will keep them not only engaged, but more confident that they can then eventually be worthy as a math student. I know, it's kind of weird, but I wanted to share this with you because I'm very sensitive to the fact that kids are going to walk into our classes next year less confident than ever because of what they've gone through. Not all of them, but some. And whatever we can do to keep giving them this kind of feedback, whether it's in a tier 1 or a tier 2 environment, I think will be really important. So having said that, I just want to say this. First of all, my thanks to all of you for participating in our high school consortia group. I really value I value your time and your action to try to provide, within the context of your real work life, provide and implement some of the things that we've gone through this year. I value what you've just done in the survey because it's going to really help inform us for next year. I don't know what next year will look like, year 3 time, because right now I don't know for sure when we would start. Can we do it in person? What is all that going to look like? Can we do it virtually? Would we have to do it virtually? We would much rather do it in person, so that might mean a later start to our entry time. But I'm going to sit down. We're going to work with Dr. Bruckner and the consortia folks and the math task force to figure out what we want to do. We'll sit down this summer and certainly let you know before summer ends. So thanks, everybody. I appreciate your time being on this today. Thank you to ESU3 and Debbie Schrader and the team, and Aaron and the team for doing this for us. I hope you have a great finish to May as this school year ends, and a great summer as you adjust to everything that's going on in our lives. Thanks, everybody, and take good care. Bye-bye.